Thanks to everybody for coming. My name is Denton. I'm a history professor at Olney Central College. A lot of you already know who I am. And we're back here again with our political assassinations in the 1960s. It's a class I teach. We focus on the assassinations of MLK, JFK, and RFK. Controversial moments in American history. We've got some of the best researchers here in the country. They're going to be here this weekend. Hope you enjoy as much as you can. And I'm going to give a little overview presentation. Hope you enjoy it. First, I need to make some quick announcements, and we're going to try to, the big things, we want to stay on time. It's so easy to fall behind on this. So, about the speakers, you guys can hear this too. At the 10-minute mark in your presentation, we'll give a 5-minute warning, and then hopefully have 5 minutes for questions. If you run over, some people like to ask questions. We might have you go out to the lobby, and we'll have a speaker out there, because we really, big focus, stay on time, okay? I'll see if I can handle that one. I want to thank the OCC Foundation and the Johnsey Foundation. Marilyn Hull's here. Appreciate it. Thanks. She's outside. We wouldn't be doing this without the contributions of those two foundations today. Also, Olney Central College, the JFK Historical Group, which is kind of me and you guys, and Project JFK CSI, which is a bunch of great guys from Kansas City, all working together on this. So, in 2017, and I'm sure most of you are aware of this, but 5 years ago, a clock ran out on the Assassination Record Review Board. 25 years where all the documents in the national files were supposed to be released in the National Archives. And so that's something that folks have waited for a long time. Yet situations happen. Then President Trump, after initially saying that he would release all of them, some folks got to him, and that was postponed, at least in part. A lot of things that were released are things that were released with redactions. And again, some folks really know a whole lot about this, and I realize that some folks don't, but we're going to try to bring that all up to speed. So, but there were a large amount of documents released, and then the timeline from there went to 2021, and then it was passed off to, okay, executive order doesn't last past an administration, so Biden had a decision to make in December of last year. And once again, though about 1,000 more documents were released, still a lot of sensitive things that apparently that still must be beyond the reach of the American people. That's where we're at. Although we've seen a lot of new stuff, and it's stuff we want to talk about. Okay? And again, the biggest thing is like the irreversible harm to national security. And I mean, that's just something that this seems beyond the pale at this point, that anything after 58, 59 years could actually be so sensitive that the American people couldn't see it. Okay? I think that's where a lot of us are at. Okay? All right. So, and this kind of gives some context about the JFK assassination. And it depends on the treatment of conspiracy today. It's a sensitive topic. And honestly, a lot of folks are, you hear the term conspiracy theorists, you hear conspiracy theories, it's come to almost mean automatically something false, something baseless, crazy, QAnon, so on. Stuff that's based upon little or no facts. But all conspiracies are not alike. It becomes particularly tiresome with the story of the JFK assassination to argue the same facts over and over again. There's a lot of guys here that have done that for a long time, Yet the facts of conspiracy, that's something that you have to take a look at and take seriously. I think the real lesson of 11/22/63 is that our institutions failed to come to any ultimate truth about this. And, there can be a true line drawn between November 22nd, 63 and a drop in public distrust. I don't know if we almost, at the time of the assassination, Americans vastly trusted the institutions, but maybe in a naive way too. In some situations, we maybe need to be more suspicious about our government, our institutions, right? Okay. So, again, these are some comments. I think the JFK assassination is rather unique because of its variance between the institutional perception of this event and the public's view of it. From the weekend of the assassination, the vast majority of the American public has, in fact, been believed that some form of conspiracy happened. And there are good reasons for that. And then the questions about, okay, why is it still important? 58, 59 years. I actually, you're probably familiar with the quote. I actually modified a quote from him, okay. One of my favorite quotes, obviously, I'm sure you're familiar with, letter from the Birmingham jail. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. MLK. I changed that around a bit. And I have that injustice at any time, especially when it involves the murder of a president, is a threat to justice for all time. That there shouldn't, the clock shouldn't be going off until justice prevails on something like this. And one of my favorite quotes, the students will probably recognize it here today. Not to know what happened before you were born is to be a child forever. You know, don't ignore something just because it didn't happen in your lifetime. And to a greater context, this is about democracy. Because democracy, and then we see this with the events that happen around the world today. It's probably much easier to be an authoritarian regime in this world today than to be a democracy. Democracy is hard. It requires openness, truth, justice. If we don't get that, we get fascism. And this, the JFK story probably represents that as much as anything. So, again, a lot of things are out there already. I mean, it's like people always wonder, well, will we ever really know? Or, you know, will we find out the truth? Or where's the smoking gun at? And I always still make the point that the JFK assassination is not so much at this point unsolved, but rather unresolved. I think we have enough evidence in it to certainly, on that first point, to disqualify the lone nut scenario. We can do that. That's the easy part. Some people up here are going to do a great job this weekend in that respect. But the problem is, again, getting some sort of institutional validation of what the truth is, to get a recognition from whether it be the academics, the government, the media, to recognize what's already there. Then we can fill in a lot of blanks in terms of what happened as we go forward. And we try. And I put the term smoking guns up there because there have been a lot of them over the years. Okay? The central part of repudiating, if you want to use that word, of the idea that one man acted alone is, it hasn't changed, is the indefensibility of the single bullet or magic bullet theory, which is still absolutely necessary if you want to have one assassin do everything that happened in Dallas. You have to have the single bullet theory. The American public, I understand, is pretty familiar with it. And it's, you know, there's plenty there. I mean, so here's CE 399, obviously. It supposedly created 7 wounds in JFK and Governor Connolly and somehow came out in perfect condition. I can show this to any one of my students, many hunters around here, and they'll look at it, there's just no way. Okay? And that a bullet can come out in that condition after causing 7 wounds going through Connolly's wrist bone. At the time, the Warren Commission, they had information to that effect. Joseph Dulce, the U.S. Army ballistics expert, examined the same things and saw the same thing we did. And he basically said, there's no way this bullet, he told the Warren Commissioner, there's no way this bullet could have done that kind of damage. And then, and Brian Edwards, a great researcher here, appeared on the JFK Revisited, talked a lot about some of the documentary. There's now strong evidence in the National Archives that, well, the chain of possession on the bullet doesn't work. That there's a real probability that the bullet that you're looking at wasn't the bullet they found on the stretcher anyway. But there'll be some experts here to talk more about that, okay? So I want to talk about some documents that, and these are things that I just feel like the single bullet theory in itself. There are many other things. The multitude of witnesses that saw something else on Dealey Plaza other than saw shots from the front. There's plenty of that to look at. But I'm just trying to kind of pose and get a starting point here and say, look, this Oswald thing doesn't work. The hard part is going back and saying, okay, now, well, where does the truth lie? And that's where many conspiracy theories open up, people with different opinions, people in the research community as well. And I understand, that's where the criticism comes, because maybe some of those theories are more far-fetched than others. But that's where we're at, to speculate, okay? So I want to spend some time talking about what I've looked at in the document. This is kind of an overview of the last 4 or 5 years of what I think are some of the most important things that we have found in the National Archives, and kind of go through those and bring some narrative to it, okay? So, the first one, because this has been circulated a lot, what the newly declassified documents tell us. Number one, the Russians didn't do it, okay? And I say, well, that's been the kind of thing that's been from the time of the assassination. I think it's a level of disinformation that came out of the CIA, somehow blamed the Soviet Union for the assassination of JFK. And in fact, even in this past year, I believe, or past year and a half, a Cold Warrior, leftover Cold Warrior James Woolsey, released a book suggesting, once again, that maybe the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev and the Russians were involved in the assassination somehow. And it just doesn't hold up to scrutiny. It doesn't hold up to the rational test. And it doesn't hold up to some of the documentation I'm about to show you. So, in 1963, we know that Kennedy, JFK, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, especially, was moving towards peace with the Soviet Union. And it was obvious, it's famous, which every American should learn, watch, is an American University speech of JFK. When he talked about, we are all mortal, we all breathe the same air. The Russians were listening. It was the only speech verbatim printed in a communist state in the Soviet Union by an American president. They heard that. We had the test ban treaty that fall that people thought was impossible. We got it done. And of course, at the same time, I think Kennedy was making more enemies, moving away from the Cold War at that point in time. But the point is that why would the Soviets risk World War III at that point with some sort of assassination attempt? And I think this document is one that I came across as very eye-opening in that respect. Of course, there's a story from the New York Post about Oswald was ordered to kill JFK by the Soviets. So this is from a document that I came across from basically a inside informant inside the Kremlin. His codename was Shamrock, and he just had an important inside source in terms of gaining Russian intelligence. Okay, and basically it points out a few things. Number one, it's interesting. I think the Russians did their research too. Their intelligence, I mean, you can say what you can about the Russians, but they had a good intelligence apparatus in the 1960s. And I think they were very concerned about what happened in America and what it led, and whether that might be pinned on them. And their conclusions in this document in 1967 was that they called them monopolists. I guess their word for the military-industrial complex might have been behind the assassination. Their perspective. Okay, this is not something publicized, they were propaganda, this is kind of what they thought. But further down, maybe more important here on this document, I don't know how well you can see it, was they felt like, as it states here, the death of Kennedy was a great loss, not only for the United States and the Soviet Union, but for the whole world. In fact, the Soviets even suggest that the source says the Soviets were mourning Kennedy's death. Because he was somebody they thought they were. That doesn't add up to somebody, the Russians are going to be the ones behind this story. And I think this document goes a long way in that respect, pointing that out. Okay? Well, number two, in terms of things that I think are significant that happened with the new documents, and this one probably got the most national attention, when it came out was an FBI informant suggested that Jack Ruby, the morning of the assassination, had stated he was going to go watch the fireworks that day. And that November 22nd was not July 4th. So there's good evidence that the man that ultimately silenced the lone nut, Lee Harvey Oswald, was aware of what was about to happen, and assuming this FBI informant was accurate. Now, let's point out here that people, and I've had a conversation with Larry Rivera about this, about people that are FBI informants are just not just anybody off the street. There are people that are considered reliable in their information. So, assuming this is a reliable informant, it's very significant, isn't it? But there's a bigger narrative to this, though. I mean, Ruby was not the only person making those comments that day. In fact, somebody who was a very close associate to him would make similar comments. And I've probably got this in. This is a CIA document that basically suggests Gordon McClendon, a true Texas insider, was a witting collaborator to the CIA. We know he had association with CIA just later on. But he also knew Ruby, okay? And what about McClendon? What was he doing? What was he saying that day? This is a little bit more about Gordon McClendon. And basically, on the day of the assassination, there were witnesses who, Ed Tatro, my good friend, who's I think out there in the lobby, said pointed out that there were witnesses said on the day of the assassination. McClendon also at work was talking about going to see and get the president shot, making it some sort of statement. Like, it's incredible, right? So, and then when Jack Ruby was arrested after shooting Lee Oswald a couple days later, author Seth Kanner suggests that Ruby shouted out for Gordon McClendon when he was arrested. That's how close those guys were. What is the connection there? Sometimes you look at these narratives, and McClendon was a guy who knew just about everybody in Texas and closely connected to him. And it goes beyond that. Gary Shaw, who's here, I think Gary knows this well. I think he found this in a deposition in 1978. Whitey Estes gave a 13-page deposition to the FBI. He stated that he said he worked at the Carousel Club preceding the assassination, and he at one point saw, or more than one occasion, with Ruby with Lee Oswald, and at one point with Lee Oswald and Texas Governor John Connally before the assassination. What is going on? Again, a guy walks into FBI and gives a 13-page deposition. Why would he come in and make all that up? So these are some connections that you tend to follow and start at the starting point with some of these documents and move in some different directions. Okay, let's go on to another one here. And this is one I just came across, and Larry Rivera and I were talking about this. And I'm sure some people saw it before. This is one in the new documents as well. A statement to the effect, I'm saying that the CIA engaged in actions designed to discredit Jim Garrison's case against Clay Shaw. Of course, if you know the movie JFK, it's built all around the Garrison case. And, the Garrison case is very controversial. There are some folks that think Garrison's a fraud, or his investigation was a fraud, and we can go through all that. But there's no doubt that the CIA was making every attempt to shut Garrison down. And that suggests that they were worried about what Garrison had, okay? Now, let me be more specific. Okay, now this is how well you can read this, but it was a document we came across from 1968 when Garrison was in the middle of his case. He actually would make an appearance on Dutch TV, the Netherlands, okay? And an interviewer named William Oltmans is an interesting character in all this as well. But from a CIA document, we find out that, the CIA was busy in the Netherlands trying to discredit Jim Garrison. So why? How long do the CIA's tentacles reach where they have to
go all the way to the Netherlands to release derogatory information about Garrison and to release it to CIA assets to discredit Jim Garrison. I think one of the more important things on the document was that they suggest that Garrison gave a persuasive performance. In other words, and we've seen other documents where the CIA thought Garrison has something, and we're concerned about it. Okay? So, speaking of CIA people, and I've covered these things a lot already, some of you with this review, but I think it's certainly worth, I think the documents, there's a couple people in particular that we've really focused on stuff and information. And those two members of the CIA, William Harvey and Dave Morales. And I think the documents kind of indicate these guys are in the middle of this, especially when we look at with Harvey. And there's a lot to talk about with Harvey. I mean, some people suggested he was a real-life James Bond. And the documents, certainly, the CIA documents I've looked at about Harvey give a description that really creates the perfect profile for someone capable of doing being involved in the assassination, of having the tools, the experience, the extremism, the radicalism. People have to have a radical attitude if they're going to participate in the assassination of a president. And Harvey was all that. He's described in the documents as involved with highly sensitive and extremely political operations. He moved into positions that were stronger than his superior officers. In other words, the CIA was saying he was going rogue a lot. So he was apt to go rogue. And he had his disposal a coterie of officers loyal to him, Harvey men, lots of them, Cubans, people that were willing to do what he asked them to do. Okay? And we have other documents about Harvey. Harvey's relationship with the mob, the Hollywood-connected mobster John Roselli, who's kind of in the middle of all this too. And I found a document on John Roselli, where the CIA goes through a specific thing of all their contacts. But the CIA was involved with the mob. Most of this community already know this, but that should be a shocking revelation that a government agency was actively participating with the mob in terms of actions or assassinations. And Roselli was kind of the go-between. And this document on Roselli, I went through it, and at one point I found one eye-opening statement. The CIA gave a serious chronology of their relationship with John Roselli until May of 1962, when Harvey takes over as case officer for Roselli, who's a lot of people think is central to this story too. And it says, it is not known by this office whether Roselli was used operationally from that point on. In other words, they're saying, one, we don't know what Harvey and Roselli were doing, or two, we're not going to say. Okay? And Harvey was also connected to the elusive Q.J. Wynn, and people can talk about a foreign potential assassin, the code name Q.J. Wynn, without getting too deep into that. But Harvey, when he was interviewed by the House Select Committee, when Congress was reinvesting this case in 1976, he was asked about this Q.J. Wynn, who might have been involved with the assassination of the African leader Lumumba, which the CIA had their hands on. And Harvey said, no, I don't know anything about it. He wasn't in the United States or at any time. No. So apparently they had documentation that says, okay, we got here a plane ticket you bought for this guy. Really? You just said he wasn't in the United States. Okay, well, I guess he said something about, well, maybe it was John Roselli. No, it was the guy we're thinking about. And when he was interviewed, he made a really bold statement too, speaking of Harvey, when he was pressed by this House investigators about assassinations and his involvement with them. At one point, he just blurts out, I suppose this is the few good men moment, Jack Nicholson, I always say this, where he just says, the one sure way to do it, assassinate someone, was simply appoint a single officer to do everything, run the operation, kill the person, bury the body, and tell no one. So you really want to know how to assassinate somebody? Here it is. Basically what he's telling the House Select Committee. And I think, and if you go look at some videos of his wife, Harvey died not long after this. It's obvious of the absolute contempt that William Harvey had for JFK, okay? And even, this is a document basically suggests that even the CIA was getting frustrated with Harvey and his bold tactics in Cuba. Then there's Dave Morales, and Morales had a stellar reputation with the CIA from looking at the documents. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not, but he was described as a one-man gang, okay? Willing to do just about anything: counterintelligence, sabotage, political action, propaganda. And here it is again, by the subtle comments in the documents, a great number of miscellaneous activities that defy classification. I wonder what that was. Okay? All right. I'm going to catch up here and make sure I'm on track. Okay. So, next thing, in terms of finds, what do you think are important here? Let's use my clicker. And again, this is something that a lot of folks have speculated for a long time. I'm not saying this is revelatory, but yet this kind of gives further confirmation of what's in the documents. There is good reason to believe the CIA intended the Bay of Pigs invasion should fail in order to coerce JFK into invading Cuba. The Cuban, obviously the whole Bay of Pigs fiasco that the CIA was involved with, they had to convince JFK that this was the thing to do. Yet there's a lot of evidence to suggest, as we'll get into, that maybe what they really meant to do was back Kennedy into a corner and get him to invade Cuba with regular American forces, which Kennedy said, absolutely, we're not going to invade another country. If you want to conduct an operation in Cuba, go ahead. So, but let's look at this document. I'll get to the document in a moment, but the document we're about to look at basically suggests that, well, this thing was doomed to failure by design, speaking of the Bay of Pigs. There's a lot of things to suggest that. Allen Dulles, who was head of the CIA at the time, was totally disengaged, off somewhere giving a speech in Central America, like he really, when this whole Bay of Pigs operation goes down, they put, what's that? Puerto Rico, and they're putting 1,200 guys on the beaches in another country, a CIA operation, and he's totally disengaged. David Talbot, the author, suggests that CIA's Robert Armory, who did a review of the case, thought instead of sending the A team into the Bay of Pigs operation, it was more like they took guys that would be the C-minus team, people that really weren't even qualified to be a part of that operation. Although I will say that Dave Morales was in on this. I'm not sure how he fits in, but Morales was involved with the Bay of Pigs. Okay, so I came across this document from a reporter from the New York Journal who actually went down and interviewed Cuban exiles that had just participated in that failed operation, or they either escaped or were let go after, I'm not sure, but they had returned from that failed mission. And Brigham is dutifully reporting, I think, to the FBI. I think this document goes back to the FBI. He says, look, I've talked to a lot of these Cuban exiles down there, and they all think the CIA meant this operation to fail, that they sold us out, basically. And that is very telling. That's what the CIA's mission was, to allow something to fail, to force the president in. And of course, that led to a series of events. I don't think Kennedy ever trusted the CIA after that. He fired all their top people. Obviously, Bay of Pigs is a turning point, I think, in much of this story. Okay? Another document I came across from the best way to describe Frank Sturgis, someone who is a suspect in all this, obviously, a kind of loosely connected soldier of fortune, connected to the CIA, involved in this whole operation. And David Atlee Phillips, who's in the middle of this, another top CIA guy, basically Sturgis, in his House Select interview, said, David Atlee Phillips betrayed us at the Bay of Pigs. I thought that was an eye-opening statement by Sturgis. Okay? All right? And then we were going through some other folks that are of interest. And Antonio Viciana is certainly a guy that's been discussed a lot in the CIA assassination. Cuban exile, head of the radical and dangerous Alpha 66 group, who probably is as suspicious as anyone in terms of potentially participating in this story. And there's been a lot of back and forth with Viciana, who he was connected to, whether he met with David Atlee Phillips or not. I know there's folks on both sides of this story. I mean, there's Dr. John Newman, who will be speaking tomorrow, who believes that Viciana's story about meeting a CIA agent with Oswald before the assassination, he's come to believe that story is false because of the timeline issues that Viciana, in terms of, came out with his story in 2014 when he was still alive. There was initial reports of it in the 1970s that somehow Viciana, CIA David Phillips, Oswald meeting before the assassination. And then a lot of questions about Viciana associate with, well, who was he really working for? And that's going to be a question as we go forward here in terms of how a lot of these folks that are in the middle of this are not just about one agency. They seem to be passed off, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But looking at the documents, it's pretty clear if you wanted to understand Viciana, who he really worked for. I don't know if that answers the question whether he actually did something for the CIA or not, but it's pretty apparent that Viciana's loyalty was closer, based on the documents, to the United States military. Okay? And this is one example of it right here, where this is a 201 file on Antonio Viciana, which means a 201 file means that the CIA has operational interest in you. Now, that might mean you ultimately are working for them or not, but if there's a 201 file, it means they want you, they're interested in you. And they were interested in getting Viciana to be in their program, so to speak. But it's obvious from the document that Viciana was reluctant in that respect. It says that they were taking precautions of avoiding CIA penetration. Whereas we know that Viciana was a regular member of the United States Army. And there's definitely some documents that suggest he had some connections to a counterintelligence group. Well, his group did, Alpha 66, with a group called AXI, which was a counterintelligence unit with the United States military. So this and another document I have tend to support the idea that maybe Viciana, his connections were more important towards the military. Yet, on this same document that I think is very important is that Viciana wasn't unwilling. He talks about, if you want to give us, you want a handoff approach from the CIA, but if you want to give us Alpha 66 some money, we'll listen. Or give us some financial support, we'll listen. And he even states here that further down on the document, that he wouldn't mind meeting someone in the agency that is sufficiently highly placed before he makes a commitment. Now, my wondering is, this whole issue about, and I go, this is kind of nuanced for the folks that are really into this a little deeper, I understand. But if I'm allowed to speculate, when he's talking about wanting to meet with a highly placed, was that David Atlee Phillips? Could this be the guy that Viciana wanted to meet or not? But the whole issue is very much up for debate. We do know this, that here's a document from J. Edgar Hoover, another high up in Alpha 66, apparently was a target of an assassination by Trafficante, the mobster, because maybe they didn't pay their bills. And J. Edgar Hoover contacts the military. When one of these Alpha 66 guys are in trouble, Hoover doesn't contact the CIA. He contacts the military. Hey, you guys better be concerned. The mob's after you. Okay? So let's talk about this group called AXI, because it's a group that has really kind of come to the forefront in terms of discussion. I mean, I've had a lot of long discussions with Casey Quinlan here in the front row about all this, and he's going to be talking more about it as well, maybe getting far deeper into this than I. But number 7 on my list is that this group is certainly worth more scrutiny today in 2022. AXI, it's a code name for a, Casey, you want to say, what is it? What is that? Yeah, it's a small, the letters, it's not important. I mean, we just refer to it as AXI. It's a small secretive counterintelligence unit inside the United States military, and they have, in fact, become quite suspicious in all this, and the documents tend to indicate that.
An Assistant Chief of Staff of Intelligence.
Okay, all right. So you can look up the Department of Defense official history of this small outfit, and it describes as a small special purpose military unit created, keyword, in 1960 to coordinate intelligence activities for the United States Army. Fletcher Prouty, who's prominently referred to in the movie JFK and was kind of a liaison between the white military and intelligence and all that, and we can long history with Prouty. But Prouty once called AXI the black intelligence arm of the United States military. Now, so, next document that I came across is from one of the members of AXI. Her name was Dorothy Matlack, and I think she is incredibly intriguing in all this. And here's this liaison. In fact, you see the word liaison there? I don't know if I've got my pointer up there at the top. That is an application for employment by the CIA. In other words, Matlack wasn't just working for AXI in the military. Here's this collaboration thing going on again, back and forth. But you see this document, which is an employment form for Matlack, the first thing that jumps out at you, January 1958. Again, I've talked about this before. I still haven't got the answer for this. Okay, 5 minutes. All right, I got to roll. Okay, so why does Matlack, in terms of being in 1958 a member of AXI when the organization supposedly didn't exist until 1960? What's the deal? Were these people undercover, black, whatever, that there was no knowledge of, the existence of AXI before 1960? Okay? And we know there's a lot of things that happened, and there's a lot of this stuff here. I don't know if I can have time to go through all, but Matlack was involved with, later on, along with Sam Cale, another AXI member, of meeting with George de Mohrenschildt, and some of you people will be familiar with that name, as a person who was basically probably handling Oswald in Dallas before the assassination. And they met after that period of time with de Mohrenschildt, speaking of AXI members and CIA people together. They suppose we're just making a contact for a Papa Doc or a guy by the name of Clement Charles to do a business arrangement out of Haiti. But apparently, from some of the stuff we know, no, they really wanted to they wanted to get de Mohrenschildt cornered and talk to him about some certain Soviet defector, you might say. And by the way, I skipped over this. What was I don't know if you saw that on the document. What was Matlack's responsibility, this woman, to look into defectors? Okay, it's pretty obvious that this woman was part of the program to track someone like Oswald. Okay? Okay?
David,
Yes.
can you go back to that one again?
Sure. Go.
See that? Wow, with Polish name in the middle there?
Yeah. Sienkowski. We'll take a shot at it.
The person who took over Oswald's post office box in Dallas had that last name.
Yeah. There's pretty obvious that there's some connections here. Came to in this group. Okay. Of course, he was CIA, but here we have that collaboration, right? Back and forth. Okay, and I got to move up quicker here with the time situation. Of course, this is known public. The Operation Northwoods, the United States military's actions in terms of trying to convince JFK to do all these crazy false flag, insane ops against Cuba and Castro, and it kind of shows the extremism, which is central to this story, inside the Joint Chiefs. Now, Northwoods was something that the Kennedys totally rejected. But back to AXI again. They talked about false flag operations against Castro. AXI takes it a step farther. I found this document where they bluntly say, you're not going to find this very often in a document, that what are we going to do about Castro? Well, let's just assassinate him. It's right there in the document. We'll just, why not? Actually saying, let's just get rid of him. So you've got a group that's willing to engage in assassination. They are radical enough. To me, I think that's something that has to be looked at. Okay, and then Kale, that's just another document, another Axie guy. Again, Kale made a statement when he was down in Mexico City at the embassy down there in the late 50s. I don't know whether I was working for the CIA or Axie. Again, this back and forth thing, okay? All right, number 8 on my list here. Again, some of this stuff requires a lot more explanation than maybe what we have time for, but it's pretty, these are things that we've seen, and this is further confirmation that the United States military was in fact feeding false information about the course of the war in Vietnam, leading up to the assassination. That basically, and John Newman covers this a lot, basically that they were telling that the war was basically going a lot better in Vietnam than it really was. They're trying to keep Kennedy engaged by suggesting that the Viet Cong were weaker than what they really were, and that this flood of false information. And by the way, LBJ, the vice president, was probably from Colonel Burris getting the accurate information. Why were they lying to him? Well, did they want to keep him engaged in Vietnam? Yeah, that's part of it. But, and again, I'm going fast here, but my next document I think is very important, is that early in 1964, a document from Maxwell Taylor, who's obviously set high up in the administration now with Johnson, and from the Joint Chiefs, suggesting that, well, in February of 64, 3 months after Kennedy's dead, we have another president. Now it's time, we're concerned about the validity of the intelligence coming to the President of the United States. Now they're worried about it. Maybe we need to clean up the false information that we've been sending the president. Now we got a new president, okay? Which basically that document suggests, okay? All right, I'll keep moving here. And, you know, we've seen some things. We can talk about the then and the now. Of course, the January 6th happened. Some would say, well, that was another coup d'etat attempt, right? In that case, may have failed. But one thing I wanted to, because I hear this, you watch today's news and you hear things. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, who was under President Trump, had some indications or believed that maybe there might be some attempt to overturn the election in 2000, you know, in post-2020, without getting all the politics of that. But I was just struck by Milley's statement. He said, and I find this so ironic, they may try, but they're not going to effing succeed. You can't do this without the military. You can't do this without the CIA and the FBI. We're the guys with the guns. I'm thinking it's ironic that a joint says, if you're going to do a coup, you have to have all these people in place. To me, I don't know. Was Milley thinking about 1963? I wonder. I don't know. Okay? I'm going to keep it rolling here. So, wrapping this thing up. Hopefully I'm keeping it close as I can. And I think, you know, the historical truth about the JFK assassination is something that we can still seek out. Maybe we don't get justice and that, you know, bring the people that were responsible for this to justice, but we can still find some level of historical truth. And I think that's always important, back to that statement I made it open with about democracy, that we need to do that. I mean, I think the JFK assassination probably badly damaged our institutions, but did not destroy them. But it did allow the national security state probably to assert its will on the American public in some respects. Okay, I'm quoting Ed Tatro up there. And it's also important to note that Kennedy had a whole lot of enemies. And I think that's where conspiracies go in so many different directions. And I think that we can see and look in those different directions and say, you know, this is probably a collaboration of powerful people that might have been behind the positions to do things. Okay, that's where you need to look. And maybe a good place to look for those, especially young folks, about, you know, where to do some investigation, the Texas School Book Depository. Where Lee Oswald, if we believe is the pass he was stationed at, who put him there? Some people have asked that question. Well, the name is D.H. Byrd. He owned the building, and he was a Texas insider. So the guy that hired Lee Harvey Oswald, was connected to some of the most powerful and Kennedy haters in the United States. Okay? Well, first of all, he was a crony of Lyndon Johnson, a business associate. Okay? He was close friends with Curtis LeMay, the most radical and top hater in the United States military of JFK. He was connected to Brown and Root, a top military industrial complex. Just a whole series of things where you can make one connection. Here's Oswald, here's the guy that hired him, and then here's all the people who hated him, JFK. What does that mean? How far do we go with that? Oliver Stone's movie JFK, of course, he did the documentary just out, JFK Revisited, that Brian will be talking about some tomorrow. I recall the quote from his movie where he has Jim Garrison saying, what happened in Dallas? And in the Garrison character, obviously Kevin Costner makes the comment, it was a coup d'etat with Lyndon Johnson waiting in the wings. Maybe Stone's film wasn't there that far from the truth as we go forward. Okay? And these are some important points. I need to really wrap this up. I hope I haven't gone over yet, but I'm close here. But, the quote we always hear that quote from Benjamin Franklin about, we have a republic if you can keep it. But when Franklin was asked a question about a republic 245 years ago, yet most people miss that statement, what Franklin said after. It's our responsibility to keep it. Franklin said that too. That the public has to continue to seek justice in our society. H.L. Mencken said, injustice is relatively easy to bear. What stings is justice. That's true. That we have to keep pursuing that no matter how difficult it is. The Colonel Vindman, who was testifying before Congress after the recent impeachment trial, said, this is America, right matters. That's a great quote. Except maybe it's just sometimes. Right matters sometimes in America. We have to make it more often. And this story is an unresolved story in American history. And it is one of its gravest injustices. How can we correct that? Maybe by one simple thing I'll leave you with is that maybe we get it different in the textbook. This is my history textbook. Basically, the quote, his assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald was caught several hours later. Oswald seemed a mysterious figure, emotionally unstable, spent several... that's just so vague. Come on. There is enough compilation of evidence in 2022 that we know that is not the story, that this is fiction. So, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I just want to open up with a few things, and we're going to try to keep this story moving.